it is the law of love. Jesus said, they all hang on these two commandments now. Yeah. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. If you are doing that, if you are actively practicing that in your life, you are going to your life is going to look dramatically and radically different than someone else who isn't doing that. You're automatically going to say no to certain things. You're automatically going to embrace others because you're always lining it up to that standard. And it's a standard of, I think, rather than, I love that the Lord's language now is not no, but rather yes. I'm not saying no to all these things. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Right. I'm now saying yes to love. I'm saying I'm going to open up my heart to the Lord, and I'm going to give him all of my heart, all of my soul, and all of my mind. And in order to embrace the Lord, I immediately began to jettison certain things, jettison certain behavior. I want to be rid of it. Yeah. I want him to help me rid of it. I want to move away from this. I'm not going to have this hardness of heart. I'm not going to have this unforgiveness. I'm going to immediately begin to clean my act up because I want this with him. Yeah. That's the first and greatest, Jesus said, the greatest commandment. So my life immediately is going to begin to reflect that. Yeah. And then the second is love your neighbor as yourself. And I want to talk about that a little bit because the Lord has had to give me a little bit of revelation on this one because I was not raised with this revelation. I wasn't really taught this because we immediately, in hearing that, say, oh, we gotta love our neighbor. Then we have to love our neighbor. Right. They're the most important. But the Lord has always pointed out to me, no, I didn't ask you to love yourself less than your neighbor. I asked you that as you go to make decisions that you do consider your neighbor. You are considerate. You consider the ramifications. You consider the effects that it's going to have upon the people in your life. There are ripple effects for every decision that you make. And I ask you to take responsibility for that. And that is love. That is love, is when I consider the short-term and the long-term effects of my decisions. That's consideration. That's love. Yeah. But also, he is not asking us to love ourselves any less. Right. And there are times in life, because we are dealing with free will, we're dealing with the enemy, we're dealing with mankind. Also, we're being led by the Lord because we love the Lord. First of all, the first commandment was to love him with all of our heart. So when because I love him with all of my heart, sometimes these things come into conflict. That love comes into conflict with choices that men and women are making around me. Right. They would have me to do something else. They would require something else of me. They demand or obligate or expect something else, and I have to follow this out. I have to do this because this is the first commandment that I live by. It is the greatest commandment that I live by. Yeah. And so if something comes into conflict with that, I must do it. And Jesus did say to his disciples, some of you are going to have to make you're going to have to give up houses and husbands and wives and lands. And often in the church, we ignore that scripture. Like, no, the Lord would never ask you to do that. Right. You would never have to, maybe lands, of course, we would give up wealth, but to give up relationships, to give up family, that's an unholy thought. Family always comes first. Relationships, spouses, always there. That is a holy, holy covenant. And while I agree, it is very sacred. It is the most sacred covenant that you will make in this life. Jesus, first of all, comes before that. Jesus is above that sacred covenant. So if Jesus said, some of you will end up doing that for my sake and for the sake of the kingdom. And so we see that sometimes that choice has to be made. The second one is love your neighbor as yourself. And so I just sit on that for a little bit. Learning to love yourself is hugely important, and sometimes also comes into conflict because the Lord is not asking you to love yourself less than your neighbor. Right. And so sometimes the consequences of my actions are going to have ramifications They are going to affect the people around me, but they are what is best. They are what is right. They are what loves myself. They are what honors the Lord. They honor His love in my life. Yeah. And so we have to make these calls. So Jesus was saying all the law and all the prophets hang on those two commandments.